Good morning. I'm Jane Harmon, former member of Congress and currently president and CEO of the Wilson Center. I want to wish everyone on the East Coast and with a little snow, good late morning. I want to wish our guest of honor good early morning. She's in Los Angeles, just learned this. And I understand we also have some guests in Africa. So this will be quite a special event. And I couldn't be more excited about it. This is, drum roll, the inaugural Congressman Howard Wolpe Award and Conversation on Africa. Long overdue. Thank you for joining us as we honor the legacy and celebrate the contributions and service of two advocates for stronger U.S.-Africa relations. As many of you know, most of you should remember, Howard Wolpe was a tireless leader, public servant, and dedicated Africanist. He served as the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, Global Human Rights, and International Organizations. It's quite a mouthful. For 10 years, as the special envoy to the African Great Lakes region during the Clinton administration, as special advisor to the Secretary for Africa's Great Lakes region during the Obama administration, and of course, most important, to the Wilson Center. In 2003, he became the first director of the Wilson Center's Africa program and played a critical role in building it. This award is dedicated to his legacy and recognizes those who have made great strides to strengthen U.S.-Africa relations. To the Wolpe family, thank you for sharing such an extraordinary leader with us. And we're honored, so I understand, to have Howard's son, Michael, Howard's wife, Julianne Fletcher Wolpe, and many of Howard's relatives in our audience today. And I would like to urge you, when we get to the question period, to ask a question and maybe share a recollection of Howard. It would be very special, a very special honor to all of us. Now, we are delighted that the first honoree of the Wolpe Award is Congresswoman Karen Bass, a great leader, a fierce advocate for deeper ties between the U.S., Africa, and she also happens to come from Los Angeles, as I do, and is my dear friend. So this event is special to the Wilson Center, to all of us. I know to the Wolpe family too, but it's really, really special to me as I enter my last month as president and CEO of the Wilson Center. What an honor for me to be able to do this. So Karen is current chair of the Subcommittee on Africa. She played a key role in the 2015 reauthorization of the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which everyone knows is called AGOA. And AGOA is the cornerstone of U.S.-Africa economic relations. And it received bipartisan support when it was extended for 10 years. Karen was a leader in that. She has been a longtime advocate for famine relief in Africa, has introduced more than 50 other bills and resolutions to address unique challenges faced by the continent. And she also, just in this last Congress, served as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus during a really momentous term of challenge. And was masterful, or should we say mistressful, in this glorious position. She has just handed the reins, but all of us admired the policy breakfast she held, which brought together ambassadors, members of the African diaspora, academics, and so on and so forth. And let me make a couple more points. While being a friend of the Wilson Center is not a consideration for this award, we certainly appreciate her enormous support for the center over recent years. And oh, by the way, Karen, just because I'm leaving, that doesn't mean you're leaving. We need you to stay involved. We need you to be a centerpiece of our Africa program going forward. And by the way, speaking of that program, for the past 7 years, our program has been ably led by Dr. Monde Miangwa, who is an African-born Rhodes Scholar with an amazing record of teaching at National Defense University and of building our program. Howard Wolpe, I'm sure, would be very proud of her. And so now, Karen, joined by Monde, it is my honor to present the Congressman Howard Wolpe U.S.-Africa Relations Leadership and Service Award to you for your dedicated leadership and service to stronger and mutually beneficial U.S.-Africa relations and commitment to building enduring bonds, cooperation, and unity of effort among Americans, the African diaspora, and Africans. Congratulations. Beautiful bowl. I understand these are your favorite colors, and I'm wearing them too because I wanted to match the bowl. And you will receive this in short order. I don't know, can we put you on the screen just for a minute so that in some virtual fashion, everyone gets it, that this award is presented by both of us? I don't know how to do that. Can somebody do that? If not, at the end of this program, Mondi will make some remarks, Karen. So I'm just not technically literate enough to do this. So we have presented you with our award. We are inviting you to make some brief comments. I will then have a conversation with you, but I can't resist hoping that in your brief comments, you will tell us about what this new Congress is like. And just a little color here. We'll turn to Africa. Oh, there's Monde. She's now, Monde wave, in case anybody doesn't know who you are. There, she's got her banner behind her, so how could you miss who she is? But at any rate, just a little color, Karen, about this new Congress, what it's like. You're not in Washington today, but I know you'll be back soon. And this transition that we all just witnessed just 1 week ago, exactly 1 week, or less than 1 week ago. Love to hear from you. And then we'll go into a conversation about Africa.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, first of all, Jane, for your friendship, for your outstanding leadership at the Wilson Center. And I have to say, it's a double honor to know that we're doing this in your last few weeks at the center, because your leadership has been superb. Unfortunately, I only had a very brief time to serve with you in Congress, because pretty much as soon as I got there, you took over the leadership of the Wilson Center, and have definitely expanded its profile worldwide. So congratulations to you. And also to Dr. Muyengwa, it's always great to work with you. We have worked together now for the last several years, and I look forward to that continuing in a new Congress, a new administration, a new day in our country. And most of all, thank you so much for the honor of this award. You know, I, of course, did not serve with the congressman, but as soon as I got there, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to run and one of the first things I wanted to do in Congress was to serve on the Africa Subcommittee. And right away, I learned and heard of his legacy, read about him, talked to people that knew him. And so it is a tremendous honor to receive the award and to be the first recipient of the award. So thank you all. And in terms of this Congress, boy, what a way to begin, huh? Beginning Congress while experiencing an insurrection for the first time in our country's history. And so I will say that at the beginning of the session, the beginning of this Congress, you have a group of people that are still pretty traumatized. And so traumatized, going through COVID, not able to have the relationships and interaction that we did pre-COVID. And like most people, don't you see your life now as before COVID and after COVID, when our lives so dramatically changed? And so I do look forward to getting back to work, to getting our committees organized, which actually in the Foreign Affairs Committee is going to happen in the next couple of days. We will organize, pick our committee chairs. Of course, I hope to continue chairing the Africa Subcommittee and get to the business of Congress. The new administration, of course, I'm very excited about, because I feel like to the world on Inauguration Day, we announced that we're back. And I think that has literally been said several times, where for the last few years, our relationships, not with Africa, but with many parts of the world, have been very confusing and inconsistent. And so I am hoping for more than anything, stability. And I'm also hoping that, you know, first order of business, not just domestically, but internationally, has to be COVID. And so I know that we will be getting to work with a relief package coming up pretty soon, and we'll be able to do a reset. So once again, I'm deeply honored to have this opportunity to discuss U.S.-African relationships. And as the Congresswoman can attest, the single most important work of a legislator is creating laws and creating laws that positively benefit and advance humanity. With the amazing changes occurring in Africa at this moment, there is no greater need than for the United States to seize the opportunity to reset our relationship with the continent. But it's been hard for us to promote accountable government that protects and preserves human rights after the last 4 years in our own country. As a matter of fact, when we were going through the attack on the Capitol, virtually within days after that, there were the elections in Uganda. And so I have to admit, and we were very concerned about the violence, the house arrest of the opposing candidates, but it was kind of hard to issue statements and be very strong when we were fighting off an insurrection in our own country. And so I was excited to see President Biden, one of his first actions was to reverse the bans on countries because of their religious beliefs, including Libya, Somalia, Eritrea, Nigeria, Sudan, and Tanzania. And so glad to see the president, that was one of his first executive orders. And so I feel confident that the new administration is going to be a breath of fresh air, not just to our domestic policies, but to our relationships with our foreign partners. And I believe that we'll reset our relationship with the continent by expanding trade and economic growth, supporting health systems and their efforts against COVID-19, which COVID has really not hit the continent in the same way as in the United States, but a real issue in South Africa and also Egypt. And making sure that we call out authoritarian governments once again and help support young people by giving them a platform to become successful. When President Biden was Vice President Biden, he participated in reframing of our policies toward the continent. And I believe that he will continue the direction of shifting the paradigm away from a poverty charity mentality toward a partnership and support for African countries that thrive on our own and support Africans because they have the capacity. And the Obama administration had several initiatives, Power Africa, which was introduced in 2013, to put it into law, but it was an initiative, Electrify Africa, of the Obama administration. Feed the Future was another example of how to support the continent by increasing the capacity of the countries, because we know that the countries have the capacity. We can support, we don't always have to look at things from a direct service or a charity model. Recently, I introduced a resolution to strengthen ties with the African Union, and I'm a firm believer in the US supporting the Continental Free Trade Agreement, which will allow the free flow of trade and commerce within the continent. One area that will be interesting to see what develops is the potential for a bilateral trade agreement between the United States and Kenya. So in fact, this Thursday, I'm having a call, a Zoom call, since that's our way of life, with all of the ambassadors from the continent. So the US African Diplomatic Corps, we're going to have a Zoom call, nor ordinarily it's a meeting or a breakfast, but we're going to do a Zoom call so that we can hear from the ambassadors what they would like to see from US-Africa relations now, and then also to introduce our chair, our new chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Greg Meeks from New York. And one commitment that he has made is to raise the profile of Africa in the whole committee. Typically, when we take up African issues, it's in the subcommittee. So he has committed to elevate Africa by having more full committee briefings about what is going on on the continent. So we all know the challenges. We know they range from human rights abuses, poverty, electoral irregularities, but these problems also occur throughout the world. And so I am going to continue to work to secure resources. We secured over $1 billion in funds to combat famine in Nigeria, Somalia, and Sudan, as well as other humanitarian and security support to the continent. So building and strengthening bilateral relations is a primary goal of mine and the Biden administration. And so to support the administration, I plan to introduce legislation to enhance the Young African Leaders Initiative, support the protection of human rights in Ethiopia, and support legislation that calls for a more diverse workforce in the State Department. So I am excited to continue and have a conversation about U.S.-Africa relationships. And once again, I want to thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you today.
That was a tour de force, Karen, and you asked and answered most of my questions, but I'll find a few more. Let me make an observation about Greg Meeks, who's another friend of the Wilson Center, and who received our award for bipartisanship last year and September, and gave a very powerful speech. It's exciting that he will chair the full committee, and it's exciting that Africa will get the place it deserves as part of the conversation in the full committee, not just part of the conversation in subcommittee. But the House seems in good shape. If we could just continue this conversation a little bit about the Senate. Some of these things you're talking about, the legislation has to get passed over there too.
Yes.
The majority has just changed. So the majority on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee has just changed. Tell us a little bit about that and whether that will make it easier, let's hope so, to move legislation to President Biden's desk. I don't think we'll have the same issues we did with President Trump in terms of getting it signed if we can get it through.
Well, I'm very optimistic. You know, one of the things that I found coming into Congress, and I will never forget Ambassador Susan Rice, she was U.S. ambassador to the UN at the time, told me that issues related to Africa typically, historically, have been very bipartisan. And I have found that to be true. And so I'm certainly hope that continues. Now, I am glad that we have a majority in both houses. Make no mistake about that. And even if it's tied in the Senate, having Vice President Harris be there to break the tie is comforting to know. But I am hopeful that we'll continue to address Africa in a bipartisan manner.
Well, let's hope so. You mentioned so many issues that I truly was going to ask you about, but I've thought of a few that you didn't mention, Karen. Amazing. You mentioned youth, but there is a huge youth bulge in Africa. And I think the prediction, if I remember learning this from Monte, is that Africa will have the highest increase in population by 2050 of any continent. And obviously those are going to be young people, gigantic youth bulge. When you look forward, you said you don't want Africa to be a charity case. You want Africa to be a number of states, more than 50 countries that are success stories. So how in the world are they going to deal with this youth bulge?
Well, first of all, there's two ways to look at it. Some look at it as a threat and danger. I look at it as an unbelievable opportunity because the imagination, the energy of youth is transformative. I mean, whenever there's any major social change movement that's really significant, youth are always at the lead. And so I feel very positive about it, which is why I really loved working with the Young African Leaders Initiative that was started under President Obama. And I was there from the beginning and saw it develop. And Congresswoman, one of the most exciting things about YALI is to see African young people meet each other. Because when they come together, they're selected from every country on the continent, selected by our embassies. We bring a cohort to the United States for a while, and then there's activities on the continent. So I've participated in activities both places. And on the continent, I've heard young people say to me over and over again, well, I would have never met people from around the continent. There wouldn't have been a vehicle, a way for us to do that. And so we have strengthened those ties. To me, that's the model, because that's building capacity of Africans. That's not going over and doing for them, thinking that they can't do for themselves. And I always compare it to how inner city America is viewed, because I think it's the same kind of perspective. Those poor, hapless people, we have to go rescue them. Now, I don't think they're poor or hapless in South Central Los Angeles, and I don't think they are on the continent of Africa either.
It's a good answer. And, with the introduction of technology to Africa, there's a way, I think, if I'm right, to accelerate development there, skip some of the bad parts, the analog parts that we are still stuck in. That's why we're going to do infrastructure reform here. and maybe accelerate to a future where these young people will have skills that older people like me will never have.
Right. Well, absolutely. We have a generation that was born with the technology. And I have certainly seen that all across the continent. And one of the things that I have seen in two specific countries, although I'm sure it's all over, Kenya and Nigeria, are young Africans now separate from the Yali initiative who come here for school and go home, or come here and work for several years and then go home and start their own companies. And I have specifically seen this a lot in the area of technology. Work for big tech here and go create big tech on the continent.
It's a great story. The other topic, two other topics that you didn't touch. I'm just trying to find things so that people think that we can multitask around here. One is climate, which is a centerpiece of Joe Biden's new administration, and Africa has had its share of climate challenges. There is a huge number of so-called climate refugees coming out of especially Southern Africa. What can Congress do? What can the Biden administration do specifically to focus on the effects of climate in Africa?
Well, I'm really looking forward to working with former Secretary Kerry, who will be a part of the Biden administration, with front and center climate being his, what he is going to focus on. And although we've gone through the debates in our country as to whether climate change is real, and you remember, Jane, when the senator brought a snowball onto the floor of the Senate to say that global warming was not happening, I'm very glad that on the continent of Africa, no one is confused. It is not an opinion. And climate has absolutely had devastating impacts on the continent. You know, the floods in Mozambique, the famine, the drought. And we know that climate refugees and climate problems have also fueled conflicts. And so I know that it will be front and center with Secretary Kerry, and look forward. One of the other first actions that President Biden did was to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. And so I know that it will be front and center, and that will be very important in terms of U.S.-Africa relations as well.
Well, in terms of a reset, yes, Biden did start to rejoin all kinds of things that the Trump administration had pulled out of, like the WHO.
Right.
There's going to be an increased emphasis on participating in the UN. The World Bank is something that we're going to pay much more attention to. The African Union is something that you've talked about a lot. Tell us how the focus on these international organizations, some of which develop political capacity through Africa, that's the African Union, will help reset the relationship between the administration, Congress, and individual countries in Africa, plus the whole continent.
Well, I mean, when we step away from these international organizations, it also has resource implications. And so the idea that we would leave the World Health Organization in the middle of a pandemic is, was just absurd. But, you know, I think back to the Ebola crisis, and I remember the leadership that President Obama and then, of course, Vice President Biden had, where they mobilized the world to stamp out Ebola, because Ebola could have spread all around the continent. It could have spread around the world, and it didn't, because of our leadership in this country. And so I think that's just one example. We are not just experiencing a pandemic in the United States, a pandemic, it's worldwide. Right. And it's not just a health crisis, it's an economic crisis. And so the leadership of all of those international organizations are needed more now than ever, and our leadership in those organizations is needed now more than ever.
So I assume you agree with me that a very effective way to reset U.S. foreign policy and U.S. moral authority in the world would be to move out smartly in these organizations to help solve the pandemic for the world, not just for the United States. Obviously, it is urgent business that we get shots in arms in US cities. Everybody is understanding that. But the capacity of the drug companies and the capacity, frankly, of the US government to do logistics the way we did them in Africa with Ebola is gigantic.
Right.
And if we want to think about a way, we have a large unemployed population, to get people not only reconnected to work, but reconnected to work with a purpose. I can't think of anything more exciting than to help the world recover from this. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. And as you said, number one priority, shots in arms. However, you know, the same inequities and disproportionate impact of the virus, the way it's impacting our country, what is going on in our country right now until the Biden administration can get a handle on it, because prior to 1 week ago, there was no national strategy, which is why there's chaos right now around the vaccines, who can get them, where to get them, when to get them, supplies in, not there. Well, I know that the Biden administration, as they did on day one, is start to implement a national strategy, but that's going to take a while. And so you have these inequities that's happening in our country. We can't allow that to happen on the continent of Africa. So right now we know that COVID has not devastated Africa. So when it comes to vaccine production and distribution, there has to be a worldwide plan. And so I don't want to see it happen where we have Europe, we have the Western countries that have the vaccine, get a handle on the pandemic, and then everything goes crazy in Africa. We have to do this as a world all at the same time, and it's going to take the leadership. And all I have to say is, thank goodness, I do believe the leadership is there now.
I totally agree with you. There also are some other success stories in the world. Taiwan is a success story. New Zealand is a success story. So it's not just, and Europe and the US are not success stories right now.
Right.
So I think the goal, right, is heal the world. I've got about 10 minutes more of questions, but I want to tell everyone that our Q&A period for all the rest of you starts at probably 10:35 Eastern time. And if you have questions, tweet us at Africa Up Close, at Africa Up Close, using the hashtag USA Africa Relations. That's all one word. Or email your questions to africa@wilsoncenter.org. That's the easier one for the tech challenged like me, africa@wilsoncenter.org. And I'm hoping that the Wolpe family will ask the first questions and introduce themselves and tell us how you are. You know, it would really be an honor for us if you're able to do that. But we're inviting other questions. We have well over 200 people on this call, so please think about it. A couple of more questions for you, Karen, from me. We haven't talked about Black Lives Matter. Obvious, huge challenge, not just in the US, but in the world, but certainly the term, I think, was coined here. You were amazingly good at managing the conversation around that, I thought, during the fall. You weren't for defunding the police, you were for, you explained yourself much better than that, you know, finding a way that everyone could join the conversation, not that the conversation would divide people. Talk about the BLM movement and its connection to Africa and how we should think about both going forward.
Well, absolutely, and thank you for that question. You know, the Black Lives Matter movement and the just horrific torture and murder of George Floyd a year ago impacted the globe. And it essentially exposed a reality that has been the case in the United States since the beginning. And that is the disproportionate treatment that Black Americans experience with law enforcement, and how in Black communities, police officers are not always viewed there to serve, but are viewed as part of the problem. And so when that movement started and spread around the world, it essentially provided the political environment for us to pass transformative legislation, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act to hold police accountable so that there are consequences if you murder someone. That's why when the officer had his knee on George Floyd's neck, he literally is looking at a camera because he wasn't worried about anything happening to him. So we passed legislation so that would end. Now, shortly thereafter, there was a movement against police abuse in Nigeria because of issues that Nigerians had been having. Obviously, it's not a racial issue, but it still is an issue that needs to be addressed. But I have to say that I was so proud that all of the African nations stood in solidarity with Black America at the UN, talking about police brutality in the United States. I'm sorry the world had to see it, but you know what, Jane? I viewed it as very similar to the civil rights movement when the world saw the protesters being attacked. Jim Crow, brutality from police had gone on for generations, but when it was exposed to the world, then we saw policies begin to change. And I think that's what happened last year. Of course, now it's not reporters because everybody with the cell phone is a reporter. And if that young woman had not videoed his brutal murder, then the movement that was around the world would not have happened. It was also in Europe. I should tell you that during that time, the ambassadors from the European Union met with the Congressional Black Caucus, and the Congressional Black Caucus met with the European Parliament because they're now having a racial reckoning in Europe, looking back at their colonial history. What is their relationship with African communities in their home countries? So all of these questions are happening now, and I think that's very positive.
I totally agree, and I would just make a comment about the Wilson Center itself and Woodrow Wilson, our 28th president. I think most people know, I'm sure you do, I know you do because we've talked about it, that Woodrow Wilson was a visionary in international affairs. His views of race, however, were somewhat controversial in his own time, and 100 years later, really viewed negatively in the United States and maybe around the world. And we are focusing on that. We have a Diversity and Inclusion Council at the Wilson Center. We have had center-wide conversations about it, and we're making changes. I think we're in pretty good shape, but we could be in better shape at the center. And I get it now in a way I didn't before. Not to say I was clueless. I hope not. You know, I back in the day was chief counsel of the Subcommittee on Constitutional Rights in the U.S. Senate when we extended and expanded the Voting Rights Act. So I do get the notion of participation. But, you know, systemic racism is something that's very hard to grapple with when you're Black or when you're white. And it's something we're going to grapple with. So I just want to make that point, and I'm very proud of the Wilson Center.
Let me just say and commend you, because one of your ways of addressing it is by telling the story and telling the truth. And one of the things that I believe we suffer from in the United States is it's very hard for us to look at the entirety of our history. We like the good stories. We like George Washington's cherry tree, even though I know that wasn't a true story, but we don't want to talk about the 300 human beings he owned. And the only way we're really going to address these issues in our country is by first acknowledging that the issues exist. And when you look at racism from an institutional structural point of view, there's no reason for people to be emotional and feel guilty or all of that. These are structures that have set in place that need to be dismantled.
Well, you know, I as we say at the center, I'm in violent agreement with that sentiment. My final question is about China, because we haven't talked about China either. And we've done programming, Monday knows, on China in Africa and China in Latin America and elsewhere. But China and Africa is interesting. You are quoted somewhere as saying, there is so much frustration and criticism about China's involvement in Africa. We need to stop criticizing China's involvement in Africa and step up our own. If Africans had a choice between China and the United States, they would choose the United States. But if the United States is not there, what are Africans supposed to do? So let me just ask you a little bit about that, and then we will go to audience questions. And please understand, I'm going to read where you're supposed to, what you're supposed to do again. You can email your questions to africa@wilsoncenter.org, or you can tweet your questions to @AfricaUpClose using the hashtag US Africa Relations, which is all one word. And I know you can all do that because you're all tech savvy. Karen, my final question to you, in addition to just saying congratulations, my friend, you so well deserve this honor, and I'm so proud of the Wilson Center and so proud of you. What about China?
So, and we all know there is plenty to be critical of China about in Africa. A few things in terms of the quality of the work. We know the work is not equal. The debt that African countries fall into in dealing with China, and then the workforce. And this is one thing that absolutely hits home, and you know this in our own city in Los Angeles. In inner city areas where there is high unemployment, it's very tough to see major infrastructure projects be built and no one on the project looked like you. Well, I remember when I was in a country in Africa and seeing a major infrastructure project and looking at the workforce and having none of it be African. So I do think there is plenty to be critical of with China, but I find that that's an easy excuse, because my focus is increasing our involvement, our relationship with the continent, our ability to support infrastructure projects. And as was mentioned in my quote, I have heard African leaders say over and over again, they would much rather do business with the United States. But our involvement is lagging, in my opinion. And I don't say that just over the last few years. I think it's been lagging, and we have not prioritized Africa because we have viewed Africa not as a strategic partner, but as a continent that needs our charity. And I think that perspective has to change. And when that changes, then I think we'll be able to shift the momentum of China on the continent of Africa.
Wow. I think we are now, thank you, my friend. I hope everybody is just thrilled that you're our first recipient. But now over to you, Monday, to manage, or someone that you are designating to manage the questions from our audience. And I'm hoping that some member of the Wolpe family will be recognized first.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Monday, you're muted. Monday, muted, can't hear you.
Working on it. Thank you so much, Congressmember Bass and Congresswoman Harmon. That was a fantastic discussion and great way to get us started on this award. We do have a question from Michael Wolpe, who is Congressman Howard Wolpe's son. And his comment is, we are so thrilled that Karen is the first recipient of this award. Congratulations. Listening to Karen, I've been struck by how much she reminds me so much of how my father was able to communicate so effectively and with such optimism when discussing U.S.-Africa politics. I would be curious to ask Karen how my father's career influenced or inspired her. So over to you.
Well, absolutely. And thank you so much for the question, and what an incredible career and legacy your father has left. His mark on the House of Representatives in the U.S. Congress is absolutely still there and very strong. And so I had all of the desire in the world to get involved in U.S.-Africa relations, but did not have the background. That's not what I was focused on, domestic issues, for a very long time. And so one of the first things I did when I came to Congress was looked for those who came before me. And so meeting Donald Payne was the first person. He was ranking member at the time. And unfortunately, he was ill when I first came into Congress. And his work with your father, and then reading about your father and talking to other people who knew him and worked with him, I knew that that was the model that I wanted to follow. And so now to have the honor, the special honor, to receive this award and to be the first recipient of the award is just icing on the cake for me.
Thank you so much for that. I have a couple more questions. Actually, we have 4 questions that have come in, but I wanted to start with a question about the peace agenda. peace in Africa, building sustainable peace in Africa. When I think of Howard Wolpe, the thing that first comes to mind was his commitment to helping build a sustainable peace on the African continent. The question to you would be this, that sustainable peace continues to be elusive in several parts of the African regions, of the African continent. And so as we look ahead, what would you say the peace agenda should be in terms of where the United States can help, find that elusive peace? Do we need to reform UN peacekeeping? I look at several parts of the African continent where you've had peacekeeping missions for over 20 years, and yet we're not getting that peace dividend that we need, that we're looking for. And so what should be our priority be on, developing that sustainable peace or helping to develop that sustainable peace on the African continent? How can the United States contribute to that?
Well, I absolutely think that we need to have a comprehensive solution. So sure, looking at peacekeeping and all of that, but you could have millions of peacekeepers if you don't address the underlying reasons for the violence, then we just always will continue to address the symptoms. And so addressing the economic disparity, addressing the infrastructure, the capacity building, all of that. And by comprehensive, yeah, look, well, of course, look at peacekeeping. But I think in the same way you would address a pandemic where the world needs to come together, the world needs to come together around Africa too. So for example, I was really excited when the European Parliament was, and I'm not sure where they are now, but where they were looking at their racial reckoning. They were looking at their past as a colonial power. I think that those countries that have historically exploited the African continent need to come back to the table and say, let's address the root causes. 2/3 of the continent doesn't have electricity. The problems with roads, education, etc. The foundation for people to have economic success, for that youth bulge that we were talking about at the beginning. Those are in my opinion, the underlying causes for a lot of the conflicts. And I think until we address those, it's going to be always looking at conflicts versus preventing the conflicts, looking at suppressing them versus preventing them.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And I absolutely agree, which your answer is actually the segue into a question that we received from Adrienne Jacobs. And she's asking if you can expand upon your commitment to and challenges of strengthening democracy in Africa, and what lessons could the US learn from our African counterparts?
Well, I think the most important lesson to be learned, and I think all of us in the United States learned it in real time over these last 4 years, is the damage that one leader can actually have. And I think that voter suppression that exists in this country, that has frankly always been here, but was unfortunately strengthened by our courts a few years ago when the Voting Rights Act was essentially eviscerated. But even in the United States, just stop and think for a minute, why do we need a Voting Rights Act? So I think we need to refine our own model and talk about it around the world, but we need to be honest about it. And I can tell you, when I've gone on congressional delegations, I will see my colleagues essentially in a very disrespectful manner talk to world leaders and chastise them for the way they hold their elections and the way they block people from voting. And I see the leaders just look at them, and it's really clear what they're thinking, which is, you have a lot of nerve. I mean, you have a lot of issues in the United States. Why are people still struggling for the right to vote in the United States when you have all of the technological capacity and there's no excuse? So my answer is that we need to be honest about our own model, and we need to fight hard for democracy around the world. And we need to talk about transparency and honesty in the electoral process, and then we need to practice it at home.
That's a great response. In fact, it follows on to a question that we just got from a senior advisor in the Bureau of African Affairs at the Department of State. I think you answered it, but please feel free to amplify on it, which is basically that in the aftermath of our own elections in November and the refusal of the incumbent to accept the results, as well as the events of January 6th, do we have the moral authority to lecture African countries about democracy and free and fair elections? So I think you just answered that, but if you want to.
Let me expand on that. No, we don't have the moral authority. But you know how you capture the moral authority? And then I'll repeat what it's by being honest. So, you know, when the elections were going on in Uganda and I needed to do statements, you know, it was kind of tough. But I thought it was very important in that statement to acknowledge what was going on in the United States. And frankly, what went on in our election was a playbook for what not to do. It was an absolute playbook. And you know, when we know there's going to be a contentious election in an African country, we go through our list, you know, please don't shut down the internet, please don't do this, please don't yell your opponents, please don't, you know, invade your capital. All of those things we've told other countries and they played out here. And I think the way we regain our moral high ground is by being honest about it.
Absolutely. And I think what I hear you saying is the need for introspection, the need for humility, the need for honesty, and the need for understanding that we can also learn from other countries, even as we work to fix our own issues at home. So thank you very much for that response. We have an AGOA related question here. It says there is some chatter around on the continent about whether AGOA might be extended yet again to compensate for lost ground due to COVID's economic devastation. Do you sense any appetite for this? And in addition, what are the signals from the Biden administration as to whether we should pursue regional trade agreements in the vein of the new Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement or continue with bilateral individual trade agreements as has been started with Kenya?
Well, first of all, let me answer the last question first. I don't think that we have a signal just yet. We do need to give the administration a little bit of time. It's like not quite 7 days, but I know that there will be a comprehensive agenda when it comes to Africa. I think if we look at a signal from the Biden administration, we certainly know that he's talking about having a summit of world leaders, African leaders, business summits, continuing the work with the young African leaders. So I think the most important signal is that the Biden administration is going to promote very strong ties with the continent, even reviewing the withdrawal of troops and whether we come out of certain countries or not. But I do think we need to give the Biden administration a little bit of time. We need to have an assistant secretary for Africa. Our Secretary of State hasn't even been confirmed. So I would just say stay tuned in that regard. And then in terms of AGOA, we still have a few years left. I am concerned about the progress of AGOA. And I think that it's important that we look at it. So even pre-COVID, I felt that way. I mean, one of the things that the reauthorization called for was for each country and or region to have a strategy for how best to use AGOA. And I don't believe that has happened in a real major way. And so we do have a few years left. We need to evaluate its success over the last 5 years and figure out where we go from here. No talk about renewal as far as I know at this point in time.
Thank you. We have a question from Ruth in New York. She says, Congresswoman Bass, you spoke to the young generation in Africa. As a young Nigerian American who immigrated to the US for school, how can I find ways to be more involved and to help the people back on the continent?
Well, you know, one thing that we have in the United States, and I know exists around the world, is an incredibly vibrant, active diaspora. And the Nigerian diaspora, of course, is one of the largest. And so I think that there's a lot of ways for her to get involved in the Nigerian community. And one of the things that I want to see happen a lot more of, it already happens organically, but I'd like to see it be more deliberate, and that is really helping the African diaspora here in the United States to establish businesses and to do trade on the continent. I will tell you there's many African Americans who would like to do business on the continent of Africa. And that's where an incredible linkage could take place, because it's hard to just pick up if you're a small or a medium-sized business and you want to do business on the continent. Where do you begin? Where do you start? That's something that a question I have grappled with since I've been in Congress, is trying to promote that. And I think a real bridge could be the African diaspora, working with the traditional African-American community and helping promote our business involvement from that perspective.
Excellent. You have another question that sort of just builds on to this. And this is a question from the YALI coordinator for USAID, who happens to be a native Californian. So she's giving you a shout out. She says, we look forward to presenting you with our vision of how to scale, expand, and catalyze a transformative movement of youth through a renewed and revitalized YALI Africa. Her question to you is that you mentioned bipartisan support for African issues in Congress. Do you anticipate continued and hopefully increased support for youth initiatives such as YALI moving forward? And of course, she wants to thank you for all that you are doing.
Well, I hope to meet this anonymous Californian.
Her name is Stephanie Mikulasik, I think.
Well, I would ask Stephanie if she would call my office right away. I would like to know about what is going on and how I can be helpful. So let's get started right away. I'm excited to see the USAID Administrator, Samantha Powers, who will be coming in with certainly lots of knowledge. So call my office right away. Let's get together. We'll Zoom. We'll talk about how I can be helpful. I'd love to hear about what you're doing.
Thank you. We have another question here that again comes from one of the advisors, senior advisors at the Department of State, senior advisors for Africa at the Department of State. And it really makes the point that U.S.-Africa engagement is both substance and symbolism. And his point is that we have not had a president of the United States or a vice president make a trip to Africa in 5 years. I think that sends a message to Africans across the entire continent. Will you encourage President Biden or Vice President Harris to visit Africa sometime in late 2021?
Well, first of all, I don't think that that's going to be an issue with this administration, and I'm not so sure it was a bad thing that we had a little gap there. I think that President Biden, Vice President Harris will visit Africa. I really don't have any doubt about that. Now, whether I would really push that happen this year, I think everything has to be about COVID. I think we have to get a handle on the pandemic. So if President Biden or Vice President Harris were to go to Africa, I would imagine it would be within the COVID context. But one of the first things that President Biden did on day one was send the signal to the world that we are back, and he wants to reestablish a lot of the historic and traditional relationships. And I know that Africa is very important in that regard as well.
Sure. Thank you. Oh, we just had a flurry of questions coming in. We have 5 more minutes left. I'm not going to be able to get to them all, but Congressmember Bass, I'm wondering if I could send the outstanding questions to your team.
Absolutely.
And once we get responses for you, we'll send them to the people who've asked the questions, because they're all really, really good questions, and I'm unable to get to all of them. So let me pick on a few here. I think there's one you can get out of the way really quickly. There's a question here about whether you have any visibility on who's going to be the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs.
That seems to be the big mystery in Washington, D.C. No, not at all.
All right.
Anybody knows, tell me.
And we have another question from a student at Rutgers saying if you would speak to how the United States should address the Tigray crisis moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that I don't think was positive that was done was cutting off assistance to Ethiopia. I would hope, and this might have already happened, I do not know, but I would hope that President Biden would call the Prime Minister ASAP I think that that would be really, really important. I think one of the first and most important things to do is to signal that we understand how significant Ethiopia is, what a dangerous moment this is, and that we want to be involved. And I do believe we have been missing in action. I think that's the first step.
Let me take one final question with apologies to everybody else who sent these really good questions. We will try and get responses to you. There's a question that Africans often talk about, sometimes the United States deferring too much to the French when it comes to US engagement in former French colonies. And so there's a question here about the detrimental policies of the French in Africa, especially French-speaking Africa, which cannot be understated. And the person says a good example is their support for the 4+ genocidal war in southern Cameroons, where the French Cameroon is supported by France and atrocities are being committed. How can the US exert leadership to stop these unnecessary conflicts? And how can the Southern Cameroon's problem be resolved without considering the underlying causes and realities of two distinct countries that had independence separately? I know that's a tough question, but I
mean, first of all, I always think, you know, like I said a few minutes ago, you have to look at the underlying causes for the conflicts, and you have to begin to address those underlying causes. So a few minutes ago, we were talking about this in another context, but I think it applies in this context too. We have to get together with the European countries and say, look at the conflicts, look at the infrastructure, look at what is happening on the continent of Africa. We rebuilt Europe. We had a Marshall Plan. Why can't we come together and address the issues on the African continent? Because again, we all take the resources. We can't survive without the resources on our cell phones and many, many other places, from oil. I mean, you can just go on all day long about how we depend on Africa for its resources. Why can't we come together to help address the issues? Not for the Africans, but with the Africans.
Thank you, and that's a powerful way to conclude this award and our conversation on Africa. Again, we have over 20 questions that just came on. We will make sure that we get those to your office, and we'll connect you with the people who sent the questions on. But as we conclude this, I just wanted to say a big thank you to Congresswoman Harmon and Congressmember Bass for getting this award off to such a great start. As we were coming on for this event, I got a call from Julianne Wolpe, who wanted to share with us that Howard would be thrilled that Congressmember Bass was receiving this award. And I think she is absolutely right. So thank you so much for affirming that, Wolpe family. And thank you to you, Congressmember Bass. We could not have asked for a better honoree for this inaugural Congressman Howard Wolpe Award for Leadership and Service in U.S. Africa Relations. And we look forward to your continued leadership on Africa issues in the new Congress. To the Wolpe family, Julianne, Michael, and all of you tuning in from across the United States and in Africa, thank you for sharing Howard with us. Beyond his professional accomplishment, there is one other dimension of Howard's legacy that I wanted to highlight. As we were planning this event, I heard from many people who spoke personally to how Howard Wolpe had touched and even changed their lives, how he embraced everyone, no matter their station in life, how he mentored and helped to nurture professional careers on Africa. And I heard this time and time again, and how Howard was the perfect example of servant leadership. It is for this reason that we chose the tray as a symbol of this award, leaders who serve in the public interest. A tray made of acacia, an iconic tree in Africa known for its resilience. These are the qualities that capture Congressmember Bass as well. And so we hope that Howard's legacy will continue to live on. We certainly at the Africa program and the Wilson Center appreciate everything that Howard did in terms of peace, and establishing the Africa program. In fact, we recently concluded a book called The State of Peace Building in Africa, Lessons Learned for Policymakers and Practitioners, which was inspired by both Howard Wolpe and Steve McDonald and is dedicated to their memories. I want to take this moment to say thank you to all of you in the audience for coming and for helping us to honor these two very special leaders. May the legacy of Howard Wolpe live on, and Congressmember Bass, may your leadership continue to point the way on U.S.-Africa relations. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.